Having just shared Easter Day together, our concern has particularly related to the resurrection in a more specific and practical sense. As angels, we have a part to play which has been defined as representing the Creator to the creation and the creation to the Creator. Providing a connecting link, or to bring it down to our most immediate field of responsibility. As angels, we rightly represent God to the people and the people to God. We were speaking about stature recently. Obviously, in representing God to the people, we acknowledge the reality of our true stature as angels. It could be said that something large, then, is being represented to the people. However, when we represent the people to God, it is just the reverse, isn't it? Here is something relatively small. As angels even, how large are angels in God? The vastness of God dwarfs the individual angel, of course. I suppose it could be asked as to how many angels there are in God. Of course, this is utilizing dimensional terms to try to pin something down, something which is in fact ultimately undimensional. But I think you can see the point, that as individual angels, we are very small relative to God. Representing the people to God, we are also representing something that is quite small to God. There are those for whom we have a certain responsibility, whom we represent directly to God. But this, individually speaking, is only quite a small proportion of the people. And even if we took the whole of mankind, that would be a rather minute representation to God, if we take into account whatever there may be present in the universe as a whole. So our stature is large relative to the people. Our stature is quite small relative to God. We might take a look for a moment at the large stature relative to the people. As angels, we do not wish to behave in a brash manner. But at the same time, we should never deny our stature in our dealings and relationships with the people. It seems that very often emissaries have felt at a disadvantage somehow when working with people in the world. Possibly there is some lingering view as to what is meant when it is indicated that one should be spiritual. In the human view, this means innocuous, unimportant, unnecessary. The attitude of human nature is that it can get along very well without anything spiritual, except possibly as some sort of an adjunct to human nature. If spiritual things can be used to advantage in what human nature wants to do, well, let's include spiritual things. But it's all self-centered, isn't it? As angels, we are certainly not at any disadvantage with respect to people. Our stature is vast relative to the stature of any particular individual human nature. And while this should not make us conceited, it would only make human nature conceited, and this is angelic nature, we certainly would not deny our authority or our ability to handle what needs to be handled as angels. You will note that the Master never denied his own reality. Occasionally that seemed to get him into hot water, but he was able to handle the hot water quite easily. No problem. As there is the greater emergence into expression of the angelic nature, we find ourselves at a considerable advantage in the world and in our dealings with people. We really know what it is that's going on, whereas human beings in the world have very little idea as to what it is that's going on. They see things in a very restricted way. There is a very limited outlook and a great deal of uncertainty. Of course, human nature puts on a good front occasionally, but let's not be fooled by that. It has come to my attention recently in a number of instances where an emissary has had responsibility to work with certain patterns in the human nature state and finding out how little the experts in that particular pattern, whatever it was, really knew. It was discovered that they were all completely at sea. There was a hopeless sort of situation evident, with perhaps a little hope here and there that it might get better after a while. But now there was scarcely any awareness as to what should be done. In one instance, this came up within the school pattern in handling some particular child which had, for various reasons, been expanded so that a lot of those who had some relationship to the school system and the psychological aspect of it became aware of this instance. And the emissary was herself a teacher. And she was responsible for this child, so she was in the middle of the situation. Discovering that handling it as an emissary, she was far more capable of dealing with things than anyone else in the pattern, even though they had all kinds of letters behind their names. There were psychologists and psychiatrists and all this sort of thing, who really were completely buffaloed by the situation. They would like to do something, but they didn't really know what to do. Well, this is just an example of something to which I'm pointing now in a more general sense. We need to realize that as incarnate angels, called emissaries, we are far more capable of handling what needs to be handled than anyone else is, no matter how much of an expert they may be. Now, I'm not speaking particularly of some sort of technical expertise in which we might not be well versed. We don't all know what makes the TV go, for instance, or even nowadays almost what makes the car go. It's so complicated and abstruse. You need a specialist to diagnose the trouble, and usually they can't either. But I'm thinking of this more in terms of the handling of human nature, the handling of people. This is particularly evident, for instance, in the field of the handling of children, in the educational area. But in all aspects of human nature function, where people are concerned, we need to recognize that we ourselves have a far larger vision, a far greater understanding than human nature people could possibly have. So we don't downgrade ourselves. I think it came as quite a shock, momentarily at least, to this particular lady, that she was the one. She was the one who could handle the situation. After all, there was this panel of experts there to take care of it. They couldn't. They really didn't know the first thing about it. But she knew, and she discovered in that situation that she knew. Well, let's not put the day off, so to speak, so that we have to be presented with some particular situation before we will admit that we really do know. Why not admit that we really do know right now? The pressure in that sense of our representation of God to the people, which is what it is not particularly in question at the moment, at least not in a specific way, in the external sense. But the opportunities will arise, certainly, in the days to come, where all of you will be handling people and situations in a manner that reveals your capacity to represent God. And God isn't silly. God isn't stupid. God understands what the situation is, and if we represent Him, that is true of us. We don't need to bog ourselves down in some vast cosmic view and say, well, I don't understand that. That's not the point. Why would it be necessary to understand that? The only thing that is necessary is to understand the field of our own responsibility, which much of the time is seemingly quite small. But occasionally we find ourselves projected into a situation where there are other people who are presumably supposed to be experts, but we find out that they're not, that we know a lot more than they do. They have all the book learning, which we may not have, but we have the understanding. And consequently, we do not take the attitude, let it be by the hand of another. As someone wrote in a letter of response yesterday, in this regard, it's not let it be by the hand of another, but let it be by the Word of God. And we are on hand to speak the Word of God. Now here again, human beings have peculiar concepts about the Word of God. A sort of rolling thunder expression. But I don't think you have much acquaintance with the Word of God in that clothing. That only happens in movies, doesn't it? Where a disembodied voice, an echoing voice, comes on the scene. That isn't really the way it works. That's fanciful imagination. Man was created with the voice mechanism so that the Word of God could be spoken on earth. And if the voice mechanism of man is not available to be used, the Word of God is not spoken on earth. But we are offering this mechanism for use. And so the Word of God can be spoken on earth because we are here and because we are handling these situations. And we don't have any concept that what we say must sound as though it was God speaking, because that would be pandering to human nature, wouldn't it? And it wouldn't go down very well with human nature either. No, all that is necessary is to speak the words that are necessary, that are fitting in the situation as it arises. Having an awareness that we are the ones to handle it. Now, this doesn't mean either that we go barging in and pushing everybody else aside and say, well, now I'm going to handle this. We certainly have no evidence that the master ever did any such thing. He was quite discreet. However, when he found himself in a situation, he did not deny his own reality. And he found himself in a situation very often where the ball was tossed to him. And we will find ourselves in such situations, partly because people want to test us out, maybe, but partly also because there is an increasing awareness on the part of many that here is someone who could have the answer. So, if the ball is tossed to us, we handle it in whatever way may be fitting. We may hold on to the ball and provide what is necessary in a direct way. On the other hand, it may be fitting sometimes to toss the ball back. You may notice that the master was very expert at this. So that those who were trying to put him on the spot found themselves put on the spot. What he said on such occasions has been clothed in a certain type of language in the King James Version of the Bible, which commonly we would not speak nowadays. That has tended to give a sort of aura which is deemed to characterize the words of God, as though we had to speak in biblical language. No, we speak in the tongue that is now understood. We speak in tongues in this sense, so that those to whom we speak can understand us. And can have the opportunity of receiving what it is we offer, without our engendering wrong reactions by what we say or how we say it. We learn to be very diplomatic on many occasions. We also learn to be very forthright on some occasions. Whatever is fitting. And as we learn to offer what is spiritually fitting, we are speaking the Word of God. And this is the way by which what needs to be done on earth in our fields of responsibility may be done. So we find that our stature is far greater than the human nature stature. Now let us not ever try to inflate ourselves in human nature, blow ourselves up like a frog because somebody's going to prick the balloon. And then there is a sense of being shattered. And on that basis one is always on the defensive. We're not on the defensive. We're just offering into every situation what is needed there. But our stature relative to human nature is great. Now we need to have a consciousness of this as our angelic nature emerges, begins to come forth. We are small before God, but we are large before people. Now, once again, I would stress the fact that being large before people doesn't mean that we stand up and beat our chests. It just means that we reveal that we are capable. We are capable of doing whatever it is that needs to be done. We don't thrust ourselves forward, but when we find the ball is in our hands, we carry it, we do with it whatever is necessary. But there needs to be this sense of stature relative to human nature, so that you are never intimidated by human nature. You represent God to the people. And you couldn't do this without being large. So there comes a consciousness of stature. Perhaps it's enhanced by reason of the fact that one does find out in various situations that really is true. That one has the stature. And for some at least, there may be a little amazement to find out that one was so much more capable than everybody else in the human nature field. This is not to say that we may not find that there are those in the human nature field still who at the same time have some sensing of the reality of angelic stature. These people you will find work with you. Sometimes it will seem that the most unlikely people are the ones who work with you. The ones you have fingered, so to speak, as being the ones are not the ones at all. You let it prove itself out, while retaining your own integrity and your own stature, your own sense of angelic nature. So there is this largeness in the representation of God in one's own experience, but smallness in representing the people to God. There is always humility before God. This obviously is representing the right attitude of the people toward God. You are humble before God. You are very conscious of your insignificance in God. But the fact of insignificance in God, because God is so limitless, in no way denies your stature in the world. We have that stature, we are responsible for it. Now this is related to the upward view and the downward view. There is another way that this is sometimes considered, that is the inward view and the outward view. Now we can see how this inward view, when people look in, there is a tendency for them to think that they are looking towards something rather small. And when we look out, it's this vastness. We live in a big world. And that big world goes on and on and on in a vast universe. And we think of the largeness, therefore, as being external, and the smallness internal, which from a previous consideration you can see is just the reverse of the fact. The smallness is external. The largeness is internal. Perhaps we might see this in terms of a diagram that I was drawing before. And instead of starting with the largeness of the substance of love, let's start in the middle. With the smallness of the physical level of things. This is the smallest part of the whole. We have seen this to some extent in the recognition that when looking into the universe, the physical substance in the universe is a minute fraction, or fills a minute fraction of the total space. In other words, the physical substance is the smallest aspect of the universe. Well, let us look at this little circle here as representing the Earth, this planet, the Earth. Those are supposed to be circles. Relative to that total figure, the Earth at the center is very small. Now we have seen that the substance of love, in its pure essence, fills and encompasses the whole dimensional world. We might look at this at any level. At the moment we're looking at it from the standpoint of the Earth, the planet Earth. Or we could look at it at the same time from the standpoint of our own physical bodies, represented by that little core, numbered 1. The outermost circle represents the substance of love, the undifferentiated substance of love that is present. And that is present everywhere from the circumference to the center. Every level illustrated by the circles that I have drawn is back of that first level. In fact, all of the levels, therefore, are present relative to that little circle at the center. That is the place where the substance is richest. All the levels are there. That is the only place where all the levels actually are. As I've said before, each level permeates the level below it and extends beyond it. And this is illustrated here. So do not let us think of the 7th level, the substance of love, as merely being a little strip around here. It isn't. It's right from here to the center. It's all-inclusive. We have noted that the level of the womb, which comes next, could be said, if we are considering the creative process, to be the residue which was of such a nature that it couldn't remain in the pure essence of the substance of love. In the creative process, fire is used as a symbol of what occurs. When a fire burns, ash remains. There is a residue remaining. As the fire burns in the pure substance of love, there is that which naturally falls into the next lower vibratory level, so that each subsequent level, as the fires burn, is the ash relative to the one higher, until we come finally down to the earth itself, which is the residue of everything that has happened in the creative process. Now we can see something moving, coming down from God in the creative process. But it isn't a one-way street. There is the working of the creative fires and the residue which results therefrom. But when the whole thing has been done, and these various layers of residue are there, is the creative process going to quit? What would be the point? You just have a lump of something. Of course, it doesn't work in any case merely in one direction, even from the very start. There is what is represented by Jacob's ladder, something ascending and descending. It's all going on at the same time. In other words, there is a provision for ascension, so that the ash may not remain as ash. Now we see something of this from the standpoint of the earth, the planet, if we at the same time consider what is known about some of the other planets. Clearly there is a means here on the surface of the earth by which some sort of a transmutation is taking place. The mineral substance is being lifted up into what are considered to be animate forms of various sorts. There is an ascending process, in other words, occurring. Substance is being lifted, the ash of the earth is being lifted into other configurations. And as it is lifted, the nature of the flesh of the earth, which was before seemingly an inanimate mineral, now becomes something else, much more resilient and flexible. And the forms into which it is lifted become progressively more complex. Here is some evidence at the initial level of transmutation of what may be called ascension. The means by which substance is being resurrected, so that it need not remain ash. Now this cycle of ascension is going on, and we have a responsibility in this area. We've been considering the resurrection. The womb may be said to be the means by which life is born. The substance of love was first necessary if there was to be the substance of the womb. As we've noted before, there is nothing else but love substance, in fact, all the way through. Love substance, but at different vibratory levels. And the substance of the womb is the heaven in relationship to the life that is to be born. We find at every level there is a heaven involved, a connection. You may remember that the second day of the creative cycle described in Genesis spoke of the firmament, the heaven, the connection between the waters above and the waters below, between the truth above and the truth below, the means by which what is below may be brought forth. The heaven, at any level, is rightly a state where there is a particular atmosphere and a particular enfoldment and a particular control by which the creative process may continue. All that indicates the presence of what is called truth. So there is a heaven connecting the substance of love above with the substance of life below. Now let us again not think of it merely as this little strip. It is something that is behind, in front of the 7 and behind the 5, and extending beyond it. There is one heaven. Now we may also see that this total area, including these 3 external strips, plus whatever it is that goes to the center as well, is the heaven relative to this area here, 1, 2, and 3, the area of what we have called the triune earth. On the other hand, there is this 4, which is the connection between the two. What is above is spirit present in the dimensional world. Those 3 external, these 3 larger discs, we'll call them, represent spirit in the dimensional world. And the 4th disc, which is the level of the heart, represents the connection, the heaven, between what is above and what is below. What is below is the triune earth, the 3 lowest discs. We could look at them as discs, or we could look at them as spheres. Spheres gives them another dimension, one inside the other. The visible earth is at the center. insofar as physical vision is concerned, that is the only one that is visible. All the others are invisible. And if we were looking at the planet Earth, we might recognize the fact that it is much larger than the physical ash at the center. It has been indicated that it could extend out to about the orbit of the moon. The human view of things, which is based in involvement with externals, always emphasizes the lowest level, so that the Earth, the planet, is thought of as being the thing. But it's only 1/7 of the thing. I'm not saying that all the various concentric spheres are regularly the same amount bigger than the one inside. This is merely a diagram of something. But here is a whole. The waters above connected with the waters below by the sphere represented by 4, which relates to the substance of the heart, the pure heart, if the creation is as it should be. The pure heart, which is the window through which what is above can shine into what is below, and therefore be present relative to what is below. It all is there, back of what is below. It all permeates what is below, in any case. But if the 4th sphere is dense, cloudy, then the spheres, the larger spheres, are not known relative to the smaller spheres in the middle, relative to the Earth and to human nature. So the concern is that the veil should be dissolved, the cloud should be dissolved, so that it all may be known as one. The smallest part of it is the Earth. The smallest part of us, as we have seen before, is our physical bodies. There is much greater stature than that. Now we see the Earth as quite a large planet, in fact, relative to the physical Earth. Much larger than the physical Earth. However, even if it is as large as the orbit of the moon, in fact, that is very small, still, relative to the size of the solar system. So here we begin to see the symbol of largeness in one direction and smallness in the other direction. Now this heaven, which includes the realms of what we call spirit in the dimensional world, 7, 6, and 5, is the cool place. Where there is, what shall we say, a temperate atmosphere. It's a comfortable place for angels to dwell. And it is a place of control. This is the kingdom As the connecting sphere becomes a window through which the nature and quality of heaven may shine, it emerges into the three lowest spheres as the fire of transmutation. In other words, the hot place is the triune earth. Here is where the fire is burning in order to transmute the substance, beginning with the physical substance of the earth into substance of a higher vibratory level. Here is the returning cycle, the returning aspect of the cycle. Ascension, something moving up. There is the process then of transmutation at work in the earth. And this is the primary level of whether transmutation is occurring, so that there may be a movement upward, not as though the earth was going someplace else. Now perhaps that might not be the concept with respect to the earth, but it could be the concept with respect to the physical body of the individual, and has been, particularly in what is called Christianity. The physical earth is supposed to pop up out of the graves, for instance, and go to heaven someplace. But there is no movement, in fact, in this passion. It is a transmutation of the substance exactly where it is, not someplace else. And what is occurring may be said to refine. It's like a refiner's fire. This was a symbol that was used by one of the prophets in the Old Testament. A refiner's fire, by which the substance is refined and changes its nature. Well, we can see this in a very elementary way, as we have noted, the changing of the nature of the mineral earth as it is lifted into the bodies of living forms, whether vegetable or animal or whatever. The substance of the flesh of your body is different to a model of your body made in marble. Obviously, it may be a very accurate piece of sculpture, exactly right insofar as your body in that moment was concerned. Your body doesn't stay quite that way all the time, does it? Sometimes it gets a little larger, sometimes it seems to shrink a bit. But if at some particular point you had a sculpture in marble made of your body, there's a vast difference between that mineral structure, that inanimate structure, and your living body. The flesh of your body and all its various parts are composed of entirely different substance, or at least a different quality, a different nature. there has been that much transmutation in the experience of your own physical body from the mineral level. Something has been happening. Now it is assumed that, as I indicated when speaking about it before, that it's in the nature of a circle. That the substance just lifted up into your physical body, it stays there for a while, and then bang, it collapses down into the mineral kingdom again. This is not exactly the way it works now, in fact, but it certainly is not the way it was designed to work in the original creation. In other words, it isn't a circle. There is a movement, a continuing movement upward. And whatever has been sufficiently refined to move to the higher level moves to the higher level. And what is not capable of moving to the higher level drops down to the lower level, so that it may be acted upon again by the creative fires in the refining process. And gradually, it is lifted up. There is less and less left in the way of ash, and more moving in the ascending spiral. There is a transmutation occurring with respect to this total planet, not just with respect to the earth aspect of it, which is the very smallest aspect, but there is something happening with respect to this total planet. A movement upward, an ascending cycle is at work. But since man left his position, it has been a very slow and limited process. Everything has been at a standstill, virtually. One of the prophets says something about this in the Old Testament, too. Everything is at a standstill. It's not working the way it should, in other words, only partially so. And very little has occurred since man fell of the true creative process. It couldn't, because there was no man in place to let it happen. Now this outlines something which is incapable of being encompassed by the human mind, and if you've been trying to do that, you got kind of sleepy. But it is something that is happening, whatever words may be used to describe the process, of which it is necessary to become increasingly aware. Here is something actually occurring with which we are associated. And if we tend to sort of blot it out of our experience with the idea that, mentally speaking, we can't grasp it, then we certainly can't participate in a way that is going to be of any value in the process itself, for which we carry a very definite responsibility. As angels, we carry that responsibility, and we are here to let that responsibility be fulfilled. And as we move together, these things naturally will clarify themselves to the extent that we are willing to let it be so. Willing to let the Word of God be spoken in our own individual and collective experience.
Martin, how beautiful it is to rise above this view of a circle. I recall reaching a certain impasse in the experience of attunements at one point, especially as it related to elderly people. There was a certain block being met, and I could see in consciousness that I was being faced with the futility of my own vision. And persevering there, I became aware, not mentally, no way I even attempted to describe it, but I knew something was going someplace, and that the whole effort was worthwhile, despite a continued appearance which
something is going someplace. It hasn't been going there as easily and as rapidly as it might, because we have been in the sluggish condition of what is referred to as the fallen state. But there is the ascending cycle at work, even though it isn't working the way it should work. It is limited and restricted. And a lot more is descending than needs to descend in the true state. So we see